There are so many different types of buyers out there looking to acquire Australian businesses right now. So today on the headquarters, Simon Youlton and I are going to break down the different types of buyers that are out in the marketplace, cashed up, ready to go. Some of them might be surprising to you. Some of them might be the sorts of magical people that you have in your mind. Our aim of this video is to open your eyes up to all of the different possibilities, the pros, the cons, the different types of buyers, why you might choose which one, and what do you need to do to get ready for growth and exit as an amazing established Australian business. Welcome to the headquarters. All right, Simon. So this week we're talking about who might buy your Australian business. And this is something that I think is going to be quite illuminating for so many people, because oftentimes we just think that there's only maybe one or two types of buyers in the market that might be interested in acquiring a small business. But in our experience, there's a heck of a lot of different people that might be interested in purchasing businesses. So our intention today is to really explore all those different possibilities and open your eyes up to the world of different buyers. First off, though, can I ask you, just right now, there's a lot of buyers in the market, right? There's a lot of money, there's a lot of investment around, and it's the right time to be really thinking about an acquisition strategy and an exit strategy. I'd love to get your sort of take on the market right now in 2025 and what that really looks like for small Australian businesses.
Yeah, Kathryn, this for me is probably one of the most exciting things to talk about, as we spend a lot of time talking about how to prepare, how to get your business in good form, good shape, ready to be, to be able to get a successful deal done. But you're absolutely right. And you made a very valid point about specifically where we're at now in Australia. So we're specifically here talking about Australia, and we have seen a real shift in the way deals are getting done. And I'd categorise it as four main buyers really in the Australian market, one of which has recently emerged here, that being what we call financials or financial buyers, which would be like your private equity kind of institutions that you would have typically seen less of in Australia unless it was amongst the real high end of the business sectors. What you have seen though is really a shift in categorising these four types of buyers. Just to make it really clear and easy for all business owners to understand. If we start with the one we see a lot of at the moment here in Australia, which you hear acronyms flown around all the time, such as EBOs, MBOs. But really what that means is management buyouts, employee buyouts. Okay, so they're internal buyers. That's your internal buyer. There's another buyer within that internal class as well, which would be partners. Let's not forget partnerships, come to an end at some point, and an internal partner's often there ready. I'm not going to say ready with the checkbook. It's a little bit more complex than that, but certainly ready to take the business on. So you've got internal buyers, you've got your external buyers, which, as I said, are the financials, the financial buyers, the bigger buyers. What you also found quite recently is we've seen a lot of strategic buyers. So they might be traditionally your competitors, so that can be really quite difficult for business owners to comprehend that they might do a deal with a competitor that they've been competing with for years. But that would be the other type of buyers. And then finally, you'd have the fourth type, which is anybody else. Okay, and the reason I say that is that, particularly at the headquarters, we know for a fact that there is a buyer out there for every business. They just wear different hats. Okay, so the key is understanding what hat they're wearing and how to become attractive to that buyer, really. But that's the real four main types, Kathryn, we see all the time now.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these four different types of buyers and open your eyes to all of the possibilities. So let's start with those internal buyers, which could be employees, it could be management, it could be a partner. Let's go through them one by one and break them down. So if we start with employees, this is one, my grandfather was actually bought out by his employees, which I thought was just wonderful. I was trying to think of an example and I suddenly was like, my grandfather's business was bought by his employees. And so this is one that is more a traditional sort of buyout, and we see this happening quite a lot around the country at the moment. So particularly as people are going into retirement. Love to get your take on why this would be a good exit strategy, why these would be good buyers for you, and under what circumstances would this make sense for you to go down this route?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, first of all, if you've got an employee in your business or group of employees, which is normally what we see, coming together to look to buy the business, it's clearly a good endorsement that you've done something very, very well. If your employees love the business so much that they want to actually get involved and run the business moving forward. For them, it obviously provides the ultimate form of security in the sense they understand the business to the point that they're comfortable to consider taking it on. They may have actually a burning desire to continue the cause of the business or the purpose of the business, whatever that may be. That's often really attractive as well for a seller, a business owner, because a lot of business owners want their legacy preserved post a transaction, which might not always be the case, if you sell to another type of buyer. So it really does provide that great opportunity for a seamless transition, providing obviously the business is set up ready for that to occur. There's a lot of hurdles there though, and that's often something that's overlooked in these kind of transactions. But in general, I'd say that it's a really good way if you've got, and particularly if you've got this vision for doing some form of employee buyout down the track, that you start working closely with the team just to make sure that they understand the transition from, as I call it, employee to employer is really well understood, because it can be quite a steep learning curve when you find yourself in those shoes.
I wonder, can we talk a little bit about some of the pros and the cons to going down this route? So working with your management team or your employees for a buyout, from the owner's perspective, what are some of those pros and cons, and why would you go down this? Why would you choose this buyer?
Yeah. So, Kathryn, I think there's a lot more pros to it than cons. The big con, if we start there, as such, is it's difficult often to finance such a transaction. More difficult in the sense that, by the nature of somebody being an employee, and I am sort of, forgive me here for stereotyping a little bit, but they may not be well financially backed enough to be able to buy the business. And obviously, if entrepreneurs, watching this video, think about it, a lot of times they've started the business from scratch, so the resources required were not quite the same as buying a business like you have now. So there can be quite a significant investment, and that can be difficult to actually raise. So that's really the difficulty with that kind of transaction. But the positives, and there are ways, by the way, Kathryn, to overcome that. And we could do a whole nother topic just on that in itself. It's a complex area, but there's lots of ways to overcome that. And we can touch on some today as well. But the positives, obviously, let's talk about the clients to begin with. If the business is structured in such a way that the clients are used to dealing with other people beyond the owner, or at least we make that transition over a period of time, that's a major positive for clients, because clients don't want change that unsettles their relationship they've got with the business either. So it's really positive from that perspective. It's positive for the team, because the team there, sees a bit less change than a new owner that's totally unfamiliar to them coming in. There can be some challenges with that as well, because you've gone from potentially working with a colleague that's now your boss. That's another thing that you have to overcome. But the real thing we find when we're talking to people about these employee buyouts or management buyouts is the fact that it's an opportunity for the owner to preserve that legacy and to sort of just hand over the baton and know that the business is still going to continue going in a direction that they had originally hoped it to do. So they're really, in summary, Kathryn, the key points that I would say.
Yeah, I love all of this. I think the legacy point is a really good one. And I also really love, we'll definitely do a video at some point on the different ways that you can structure an exit. It doesn't always have to be handing over a wad of cash and walking out the door. There are many, many different ways to do this that suit both the buyer and the acquirer. So I think the buyer and the seller. So we'll go through that another time, but just know that it doesn't have to look one way. They're one dimensional. There's many, many different ways that you can do that. All right. Fantastic. Now, there's another type of internal buyer that might be a partner buyout. So you might be in a partnership, and the partner might want to, one partner might want to buy the other one out, either in a really positive way, or, I mean, I've been part of some pretty messy partnerships as well, where I've witnessed, not myself, but witnessed being a part of a business that has been a part of a very messy partnership where someone's trying to extract themselves. So, wondering if we can go through what partner buyouts look like, and again, some of those pros and cons, and some things that we should do in anticipation of a potential partner buyout in the future to avoid the messiness that might ensue.
Yeah. So, Catherine, I've been in a situation personally myself as well, and I think that you'll speak to a lot of entrepreneurs. What we do. That have been. Unfortunately, you learn the hard way often at the beginning when you find yourself in that messy part of a partnership, as you rightly put it. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of partnerships start, prosper, and can end perfectly well, and that does come down to the planning and being able to have those conversations with the partners. We encourage everybody to structure the right agreements at the very beginning, and things like partnership agreements, buy-sell agreements, what happens in the event that we're approached by a buyer and we wish to sell. Now, bearing in mind, a lot of the businesses, particularly at the headquarters, nearly all the businesses we work with, they're established, they've been running many years. So by the time we get to speak to them, they're actually already been in a partnership for some period of time, and they're now considering what their options might be. So that's got a lot of history there, and there's been a lot of conversations that we've probably not, we've certainly not been privy to. So there's a lot of stepping back to actually understand, what might be in place from a procedural perspective when it comes to a partnership ending. And partnerships really end, in a number of different ways. But if I just sort of categorize them for you, so if we think about, there's a few ways they would end. So, partnership may end as a fact of a different vision. And one of my partnerships I was personally involved in, that's all it was. I wanted to take the business in one particular direction. I was the CEO of that business at the time. The business partner who I was working with and worked very well with just didn't want to do that. So, that led to a breaking of partnership in an amicable way, but that was one such thing. Unfortunately, you do get ill health or retirement. That can also be another reason why a partnership comes to an end. And then I suppose the other one is the one it's most messy, which is just a general dispute. And we see a lot of them, unfortunately. And that's where you really do need to rely on your documentation and contracts that you've got in place. I mean, I've got a company that springs in my mind right now. It was an engineering business, and they would have spent close to $200,000 on legal fees and mediation, and they end up parting ways anyway. And this business, it was not a huge business, and $200,000 to them represented more than a year's worth of their profit. So that's the kind of issue that you can come up against if you haven't structured the relationship, which is what it is, properly, and you haven't got any sort of position to fall back on from a legal perspective of the documentation you've put in place, the what if scenarios. So working through that is actually critical, I think, in any form of a partnership. And then, Kathryn, the question you asked was, how that transaction actually takes place. I mean, if it's documented and it's clear and you've been having these discussions, it just makes it easier when you get to that point. You don't disagree on values, you don't disagree on the process for one partner exiting. And let's not forget, it's really good if this is all in place for the customers, because again, the last thing they want to know is that the leaders of the business are in a major dispute. It's a sure way to destroy value in the business for everybody.
100%. What I want to be clear. I mean, this is obviously the stuff of Hollywood movies and things, partnership disputes in business and, falling outs and all sorts of things. However, there are also incredible and very successful and great outcomes from many, many partnerships. And so I don't want to suggest in any way, shape or form that this is a negative type of way to run a business. It's just one of those ones, as Simon says, that you probably should have your ducks lined up. Make sure that you do as much prep work at the beginning as you possibly can. But if you haven't, then speak to people like Simon and I to try and mitigate that risk now and do planning so that the outcome is more likely to be a super positive one for everyone involved. Amazing. So they're the internal buyers. So that's our buyer scenario number one. Buyer scenario number two is the holy grail. It is probably the one, again, of stuff and legends that we hear about that most business owners probably dream about. They wake up at midnight and they're like, oh my goodness, if only I could find a strategic buyer who would come and pay me this massive multiple because, I own a market that they really want to infiltrate. So let's talk about strategic buyers, Simon, the holy grail. Can you talk me through some different types of scenarios and why strategic buyers might have their eye on small to medium businesses in Australia right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right to categorize it as the Holy Grail. The thing with a strategic buyer that I always find just so interesting when you're an SME in Australia is because of the natural challenges of an SME. And one of the big ones we always talk about, as you know, Kathryn, is owner dependency. What you tend to find with strategic buyers, as we call them, competitors, people running similar businesses to yourself, maybe not directly competing. They might be interstate and they may just be looking at your business from another state. So you're in the same field, you'd be competing if you were in the same state, but you're not in the same state. So that's also what we would class as a strategic. It doesn't have to be a direct competitor, but they generally understand your business really well because they're running a business very similar or the same as you in many respects. So that is a big major tick for a lot of the SMEs that's going to struggle being very owner dependent to sell their business to a new team that's got, new ideas, no relationships with the clients, and doesn't fully understand the business as such. So a competitor like that, or as strategic as we call them, can be really, really good from that perspective. As a result of that, and what's really, really positive for SMEs is we often find, and this is why you can categorize them as a holy grail. They generally will pay more money as a result. So we've seen deals done where the typical multiple of, say, an EBITDA, if we use that ratio, maybe 3 times, but if a strategic purchases it, and there's several deals that we've been involved in, it's been double that, it's been 5 or 6 times. And it's purely because they've got an infrastructure already and they're able to see where they can gain the efficiencies, the cost savings, get access to a new client base. So it's almost one of those from a buyer to reach that buyer. It's the one you have to be most careful about because you're dealing with, as someone once said to me, the enemy. But it's one of the routes that can often be the most rewarding in terms of a financial aspect and outcome for the actual seller of the business. So yeah, absolutely holy grail. Kathryn, fully concur with your categorization there.
So if an Aussie business wants to be acquired by one of these magical strategic buyers, this is exactly what you and I do at the headquarters. So I'm going to give a big shout out to the work that we do in preparing you, and then not just preparing you to make you attractive to a strategic buyer, but also then potentially working side by side with you to go and find the people that might, or the brands that might be the best type of acquirer for you, is some of the work that you and I do here at the headquarters. I'm just wondering if you could summarize, Simon, in your words, how an Australian business might right now make themselves really attractive to someone who might pay those big, crazy, magical prices that a strategic buyer might be looking to pay.
Yeah. So look, I think first of all, what's important is to understand the path that you want to go down. And if a strategic buyer is the path, and there'll be many, many factors that determine which buyer is right for you. So that's another big thing that we spend a lot of time doing at the headquarters. So buyers wear different hats. You've got to know which hat suits your business the best. And then you've got to become attractive to that, let's call them a hat wearer. You've got to really know what's going to excite them and what's going to really, for them, make them show interest in your business. What we find when we're dealing with strategics is because of the fact that they are absolutely looking at your business for the purpose of how it can synergize with their current business. It's not just a standalone growth opportunity that you might see, say, with private equity, which we'll talk about shortly. Because of that reason, the best thing you can possibly do is make sure that picture is painted really clearly. So we spend a lot of time modeling businesses. I use that phrase a lot, but getting them into position that when they're on that catwalk, they really are showing off at their very best. Okay, so they're able to be spotted, and it's very clear if we believe that the business you're trying to sell or find that option for will add value to a competitor in X, Y, Z form, then we make that really clear. So we articulate that very well. We model that from a financial perspective really well, and then we step back and look at the business and make sure that the business actually can do that. So we try to make it super clear so that people aren't left scratching their head wondering, how does this business add real value to my business? And that's the first real step. Now that I've obviously summarized that, there's a lot of pieces to it that make that work, but think of it as a bit like a puzzle, and you're that missing piece. You've got to identify why you're the missing piece and how you're going to complete the bigger picture, the bigger puzzle that the competitor business or the strategic is trying to build. That's the first step, Kathryn, in making that really a very successful outcome for lots of SMEs here in Australia.
Yeah, as you know, I love that part of it, painting that picture and then showing the strategic buyer why you fit into that. So just to give you guys who might be wondering, well, what does that really look like in practice? What that might look like is a larger business or enterprise level business that wants more market share in your particular location. So perhaps, they want to enter the Western Australian market, but they're a New South Wales based company, vice versa. Or it might be a really large company that's just looking for market share in some other verticals that make sense for them. So, for example, it might be, a big, like a Bunnings type of company that might like to add another vertical to what they're doing. So the garden centre type of vertical that Bunnings entered, or they're going into pet care right now. And so those larger companies acquiring more market share in other parts verticals in their market. Are there any other examples, Simon, of types of strategic buyers that might give some ideas as business owners are thinking about this?
There are. There's many, but I can give you two really good ones from 2025 that have really excited me. The interstate ones you talk about, Kathryn, there's a lot of them happening. It's very difficult to set up a business in other states when you don't necessarily know all the legislation. It does differ by states, and obviously the one thing we've been super successful at the headquarters is reaching other buyers in different states. Okay, and I'm obviously here in Western Australia today, and as you know, I've told you so many times, for people trying to set up a business from eastern states in Western Australia is really difficult. They get very frustrated. And so often that actually is why this interstate purchases we see quite significant. But that said, as the main one, I'll give you the two examples. So same state, software company, it was a security company, security software company. They had created a product that was specifically tailored for financial institutions, and they had 15 enterprise clients. Okay, so it's 15 really decent sized clients. And that was pretty much it. They couldn't scale beyond that because they needed the resources to go to visit the companies and to win more market share, additional marketing costs, and so on and so on. So they basically were quite content where they sat. And one of these strategics, as we call them, looked at that as a significant opportunity, as they had a massive client base interstate all over Australia. Their hub happened to be in this particular state where this software company was operating, and they saw an opportunity to acquire that business and then use the security software amongst their existing client base. So it for them was an absolutely phenomenal purchase. We were representing the seller, which was an awesome outcome as well, because we were able to achieve a far greater multiple than ever would have been achieved just as that business being a standalone, without it being acquired by a strategic as such. So that would be one very clear example. And the one that we've just completed very recently actually was for a large cleaning company that actually was acquired by a facility management group. that used to look after a whole load of properties. And the cleaning company obviously was a number of contracts in that same sort of space, but they were two very different businesses. We call that adjacent businesses. So property management versus deep cleaning, commercial cleaning. But again, the same clients, the same kind of clients are buying both those services. So Strategic sees that as a great opportunity to get into the market quickly without the hard, heavy lifting that's involved when you set a business up from scratch. All the licenses, permits and things like that are already there. And it's the same client base ultimately that are buying both of those services. So that would be the other clear example, but there's countless examples, Kathryn, because we've seen a real emphasis recently amongst these buyers to expand in ways beyond typical marketing, and they see it as just a quicker way to gain more market share than the hard yards we all put in as entrepreneurs building our business in the first place.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that I just want to sort of open everyone's eyes to as well is offshore buyers. So we definitely focus on the Australian market, but certainly we are, still in a very global market. And there's a lot of businesses that might be ripe for acquisition for buyers that aren't actually Australian companies. So there's that as well. And Simon and I are all over that and looking at a global opportunity for everyone that we work with as well. And particularly now, there's a lot of, Australia is very attractive. We have a stable environment and stable businesses here. So we're quite an attractive place for acquisition, which leads me to private equity and the financial buyers, Simon. And oftentimes we do have offshore investment, or we've got, Australian investment. This whole world, so number 3 type of buyer, financial buyer, this whole world of private equity and investment can be quite murky, mysterious. If you've just been running your local Australian business for some time, people talk about this idea of a private equity firm coming in and making an acquisition. It can probably feel a little bit like, what is that and why would I do that? And that just all sounds a little bit too complex for me. So I'm wondering, this is actually where your background all stemmed from. So I'm wondering if you could just explain that world of private equity and what it is, and then why this might be attractive to an Australian company.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. That was my first ever deal I ever did personally with a company I owned, was the private equity back in 2013. So, what's that, 12 years ago now? And that was an interesting experience for me. And I have to say, a lot of the way private equity was perceived has changed. There's been a big shift. And I think a real positive shift. So, if we look back on the days when private equity was known to buy companies, seize these businesses, strip out the management, make cost cutting, and just literally they're quite ruthless. And that's that Mysteria kind of approach to private equity. And we've all seen movies and films and so on. And I think when I was doing my first deal with private equity, and then I actually went to actually do some work with private equity, people sort of thought I was the Richard Gere of, Pretty Woman or something. But no, unfortunately not at all. And I certainly didn't drive. I think it was a Lamborghini. But no, not at all. But that whole mysterious way private equity function certainly is not what we're seeing here in Australia now. Okay. So first of all, let's start on that point. When I moved to Australia in 2015, we weren't seeing much private equity even in Australia at all. It was very much a thing that we, were seeing more in Europe, US, and so on, other countries. But lately we've seen a lot of private equity buyers here in Australia. And I think there's a lot to do with other markets are saturated. And now Australia's really leads to them as great potential. So we see a lot of private equity here. The way they go about things, they generally are looking for the bigger sized businesses. So they want to really probably see a business that's turning over more than about $1 million a year of profit. Not to mention, though, it's not to be confused with the fact they are buying businesses that are smaller, but generally through a business they've already acquired. So that's quite an important distinction. So you could be doing a potential deal with someone that's private equity backed. And that's a whole different ballgame, because then you have to still understand that ultimately that private equity company is often going to have sign off on the deal. So you have to model your business in such a way that it's when going through due diligence in a different way to if it was just a sale to a strategic, for example. So knowing who the ultimate buyer is actually really important, Kathryn, and that's why we're seeing a lot of businesses that are still being acquired by private equity that are well below that 1 million of profit, but they're being acquired through a business private equity has already purchased. The one thing private equity, though, make really clear, and that's never changed, is they're looking for growth opportunities. And speed is important to them because the way they raise money, they're out within 3 to 7 years. So they're not long-term holders of a position. They generally take a majority stake in the business or buy it fully, but they like to tie in the management team often. So that's real important that you've got a team in the business that's able to work with private equity. They do take large minority stakes sometimes as well. So they really have become more flexible. So again, this is the change of the times that we're seeing. But they really are not looking to run the business. So the myth of they put their own management team in and sack all the managers, like was in the day when I started in with PE, and that was again my perception. It really could not be further from the truth. They're not business operators as such. They want people to operate a business. They're investors. Okay, so that's a big fundamental difference. So everything you do when you're positioning your business to do a deal with private equity needs to lead to them being able to understand what the investment opportunity actually is.
I mean, if you think about the market right now and where there's money, there's a lot of money that is rumbling around at that top end of the market as people are retiring, as people are looking to invest outside of typical, the share market or even property. One of the places that a lot of people with money might look to put that cash is in private equity. And so when you think about it in those terms, you can see why they're looking for that financial return on investment fairly quickly. They're looking for a 3-year typically turnaround, 3 to 5 year turnaround. They're not looking to acquire something that's going to take 10 or 20 years for them to get their money back. With that in mind, Simon, what are some of the things that businesses can do to make themselves attractive to private equity?
So it comes back again to the whole point I'd mentioned earlier around painting the picture. The thing with private equity, you don't want to leave them in a position where they're scratching their head wondering what the opportunity is. So they love upside. So they really love to take a business that's really, it doesn't have to be super well structured in the sense they understand that there's going to be changes required. You may not, for example, let's give you a clear example. A business may be running perfectly well, but you don't have a CFO in there because you're just not big enough to justify a CFO. You've got someone competent in accounts and you've got a great bookkeeper. We see that all the time. Private equity want a lot of financial reporting that will often be way beyond the ability of somebody that's, let's be honest, pretty much not a trained financial accountant working in the business. So they kind of expect to make those changes, and that's often the benefit of working with private equity. They have a lot of network, and they're able to often get you involved with decent and really well qualified people that understand your sector to be able to assist with that. So they're happy for those kind of changes. But what they really need to see is that a business is being run in a way where it's disciplined. So it needs to be run into strict KPIs, key performance indicators. It needs to understand its break-even points. It needs to understand other avenues where it could pursue growth, and it perhaps hasn't been able to do it due to either a resource or financial ability to fund a particular growth expansion plan, because that's where private equity come in, and that's that upside that I'm talking about that they want to see. They want to see what's next. And I remember when I was being mentored by my chair at the time of my first business I had, and he said to me that you need to make sure whenever you're dealing with private equity, you're always answering for them what's next constantly. So you've got to have your business as an ongoing concern now, a management team that's capable of working with an investor, which is a different trait all in itself. And then you've got to be the what next and really articulating that well so that no one's left scratching their head. And you also have to understand you will have a boss. And you need to make that clear, that you're going to, you understand what that means, because all of a sudden you're going to become accountable. So that sounds really scary, and I can tell you from experience, emotionally, it is a bit of a challenge. And that's one of the things I personally spend a lot of time helping business owners with, because I've been through that emotional challenge myself, and it's hard. But there are a lot of ways to deal with that if you know what to expect. And that's one thing that I would say you invest time in early doors if you're going to go down the route of private equity.
Absolutely. And you just have to make the decision about whether that is worth the reward. And oftentimes it can be. It's just a matter of, maybe it's short-term pain working towards a really big goal in partnership with that private equity firm. Okay, so let's talk about some other investors. There's a lot of angel investors, high net worth investors out there looking for, where do I put my cash right now? That, we were just talking about, they're cashed up looking for, maybe some fun things to do with their money, some things that they get really excited about from an impact perspective. And there's also things like family offices. Just wondering if you could talk about the different type of investors and what would make an Australian business, again, attractive, and why that would be a good fit.
Family offices, high net worth individuals, very much playing a space between, if you categorize it as, you've got individual buyers. So we spoke about the EBOs, MBOs, employee buyouts, management buyouts. And then you get to the position where you jump from there to that private equity space, which is that higher value business. So they play in that in-between space predominantly. That's what we see here in Australia. And that can vary greatly depending on the sector as well. The difference I found with versus private equity, say, versus family offices, is they're a lot more patient. So family offices are a lot more patient. We call it patient capital. So they're prepared to invest in a business and give it time. Okay, so they're not necessarily looking to get in quickly and to get out. The flip side to that, however, is they're more focused on wealth preservation, and that's predominantly because it's their own money. It's either a family's money or high net worth individuals' money. So it's not to say that PE funds, they don't care about losing money. They absolutely do, and they manage risk really, really tightly. But it's a different emphasis when you're dealing with a high value individual or a family office. So wealth preservation is key. So when we are chasing that buyer, for example, or investor, because it's not always about selling, often it can be about investing as well, which we do a lot of. But if we are chasing that kind of buyer, we know that kind of hat that they're wearing, then that business needs to be modeled in such a way that it demonstrates risk management is really, really clear, really, really well thought through. Any investment into the business, whether it's a full sale, partial sale, there is preservation of that capital. So they like to see that. And in return, they're often, we find, really very well supportive. They're also deeply knowledgeable about the sectors they're investing in. So with a private equity fund, I remember when I was dealing with private equity back in 2015, I was one of 20 different businesses from different sectors. So I would say 20 different sectors, from a financial services business through to an ice cream parlour, and everything in between. With a family office structure, you'll find that they will invest in businesses they know really, really well. So they're often can bring to the table a lot of experience and expertise. And for someone exiting a business, like some of the clients we work with, that can often be really reassuring. And there's a case that I worked on not so long ago where we were dealing with a business and they actually turned down the private equity offer that paid a 6 times multiple of their metric that was being measured for valuation, and took 4.5 via the family office route, purely because of the experience of the family office in investing in those types of businesses. And they just felt that the culture would be preserved, that the business would be able to prosper far greater than just, a large check and a big investment. So it really does present a completely different opportunity to exit your business to the other methods we've spoken about, Kathryn.
Absolutely. All right. So we've done our 3 main types. Now we've got the and everyone else bucket. So who might be the other everyone else that might be interested in buying your business?
It really is everybody else, but the reality to if you're asking me what we would see a lot of in that everybody else bucket, Australia, obviously the way it's set up with its immigration policies and so on, a lot of people come into Australia and they look to purchase a business as a new entrant to Australia. They want to set up a business in Australia, and they don't know too many people. They may have run a business very similar in their home country. They're coming into Australia. It's a great opportunity for them to be able to effectively create their own job. So we see this, and it's a very clear distinction. It's at the smaller end of the market. So it's certainly not the bigger businesses we see purchased this way. But it's at the smaller end of the market. But we see a lot of that people coming into the Australian country and want to run an Australian business. Great opportunity there. People retiring from military. We see a lot of that as well. They've got great skills, and again, want to now do something on their own, and they can often be purchasers of businesses. And then, just people who have decided, I really want to run my own business. It's much easier to buy a business than grow one. I mean, we all know the pain of setting an SME up from the beginning, a new business. It's hard work, and marketing and winning clients costs a lot of money. So if you can pick a business up that's ready to go, and that's perfect. So there is that opportunity. I must say we see a little less of that than the other businesses, particularly in the other business buyers in the latter years. But absolutely, Kathryn, it's definitely still something to consider for the particular kinds of businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone through 4 very different types of businesses and people that might acquire your business. They're all really different. And again, I want to give a shout out to the work that Simon and I do here to help you as an Australian business owner who's created and established a business, done really well, building it over the years and gone through the roller coaster of growing it, and finding the right employees and getting it consistent and all of those things. Handing that over to a buyer or even someone who's going to try and find you a buyer can be pretty significant. It's like handing over your baby to someone. So that's a lot of the work that we do at headquarters, is get you really ready for that and help you to make the decision around which type of buyer might be the most suitable, might suit you the best, might suit the business the best, and also that we can paint a really great picture to get you that great outcome. So Simon, I'm just wondering if you might have some words of wisdom around this. You've done a lot of buying and selling personally. Words of wisdom to those who are looking to sell at the moment. What are the steps that they can take right now to start making those decisions and getting ready so that they become really attractive to any of those 4 different types of buyers?
So that's an excellent summary as you've just described what we've spoken about today. And I think that the really important thing for all business owners to really understand is the different types of buyers. So obviously we've covered it today in a very brief form, but there will clearly be some buyers that will be more suitable to certain businesses than others. So actually doing that deep dive and really understanding what drives value in your business is actually really critical, and you should do that early on. So again, most of the businesses we're working with at headquarters are already established, so they've already been running for a long period of time. Had they been at the very beginning of the journey, we would have been very clear at the beginning on what the potential exit strategies are down the track. But we're not always afforded that opportunity when we've been running a business for a long period of time and you're now thinking, what are my options? So it's been really realistic, having done a real good deep dive into the business as to what the potential options are for you as a business owner to exit your business. That would then start to steer you in the direction of it could be this potential buyer or that potential buyer. You then need to have some real hard checks yourself to understand, am I up for that? As I described my own experience of private equity, I make it really clear when I'm dealing with any business selling to private equity what that journey looks like. It's not to try to put them off, because I think they afforded great opportunities, certainly to myself and to other people I know. So it's not that at all. But it's a totally different journey to a competitor, for example. Okay. And the competitor, you may have been competing with the competitor for years, and now all of a sudden you're about to work with them. And how will that sit with the team? So that can be as challenging as doing a deal, say, with private equity. And then your employee buyout, for instance, if you go down that path, you may have mentored this person for 20 years in your business, and now he's, for a temporary period of time whilst you're doing a handover, effectively will be your boss. So there is a huge transition to go through, whichever you look towards. So understanding that early on, understanding what drives the value in your business with each of those specific buyers, because I have to tell you, it's different for every one of the buyers. So you can't just do a whole load of things and you're super attractive or more attractive than you were before with all of those buyers. It doesn't work like that. Each buyer's looking at totally different things. So it's been real clear on that. And then, Kathryn, as you said early on, it's then how do you said you've got to think of market that to them. So how do you paint that picture? How do you reach them? And obviously we've had great success recently of reaching buyers through a lot of the work you've been doing, Kathryn. And that is really critical, because you could have a great looking business, all the upsides clearly articulated. But how do you get in front of these people? So it's really a combination of a lot of things, but it starts at the very beginning of understanding your business, what drives value, and who's likely to be the buyer that you're going to be most successful in getting the deal done with.
What a great wrap up. So for any of you who are an established Australian business and you're looking to sell sometime in the next 3 to 5 years, perhaps even 10 years, let's get you set up for success right now, because the sooner you do the planning, the better the outcome is going to be. And so that's the work that we do over here at the headquarters. So if you'd like to speak with us, we are Simon Youlton and Kathryn Porritt from the headquarters. You can catch up with us at theheadquarters.com.au, and we'd love to speak with you about your unique journey in selling your business and growing so that you get the best possible outcome. We'll see you on the inside.